welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Turn the Page podcast. I am your host, Jessikah. I am here with an author whose book Malice House was awesome, and it is like a dark fantasy, a little bit of horror, a little bit of I don't know, like almost like meta fiction in a way that I think a lot of people are going to like. So I'm actually going to just invite her to introduce herself and tell us about Malice House.
Yeah, hi, I'm Meghan Shepherd. I'm so excited to be talking to you. Malice House is my 12th book, but my first book specifically for an adult audience in mind. I kind of come from more of a YA background, though most of my readers were still adults, even for my YA books. So yeah, Malice House is a book about a 30-something aspiring artist, Haven, and her father is a Pulitzer Prize winning novelist, and he passes away and she goes to his, creepy seaside house to clear out his stuff and finds a hidden manuscript called Bedtime Stories for Monsters that is very different from his usual stuff. It's sort of this interconnected short story collection with very macabre, demonic characters. And she decides that she'll jumpstart her art career by illustrating it and selling it together to a publisher as like a package. And as she illustrates it, strange things start happening in this seaside town. Some people get murdered, and all of the local book people get very, very interested in it. The local bookseller, the librarian, a barista who works as a literary forger, they all take this very unusual interest in the manuscript. And Haven starts to wonder if maybe she has sort of awoken some dark magic by illustrating these characters.
I really enjoyed just the kind of like the local flavor of the town that Haven finds herself in. She's a really interesting character. I really loved her and her journey. I like first of all, I have to say that one of the things that I love about this book and a lot of these books that are coming out is it's, for a while, I felt like there was sort of a disconnect in what had to be YA and what had to be adult, and like certain things in order to be considered like an adult fantasy, adult horror, like it was like, well, if it's adult, it has to have all of these things in order to make sure that it's separated. But what I love about Malice House, and like I said, like there's other books that have been coming out like this lately, is it sort of recognizes what so many adults see in YA and what appeals to them, and what was missing. And this is not to disrespect any adult books that came before, because they are popular, they have their places, but like there's something that like 30 somethings or early 40 somethings like me wanted to see themselves in these stories too, and it's bringing what would have traditionally been only a YA story to adults. So crossover kind of goes both ways.
Yeah. I think kind of what is missing in YA fiction for adult readers is what goes beyond the questions of identity and finding your place in the world, which is so universal. I mean, you can be 60, 70 years old and still be trying to find your identity. So, I mean, that for sure appeals as a broad appeal, but YA books are just so focused on looking forward into how are you going to fit into the world. And I think a lot of 30, 40, 50 somethings, we're still interested in that, but we're also interested in looking at the repercussions of the choices we've made. And that is often not something that you see a lot in YA fiction, just because the characters are 16, they haven't made a lot of choices. But I really wanted to deal with that in the book. Haven does have a lot of questions of identity, but she's also made a lot of mistakes and a lot of tough choices, and now has to deal with those.
Yeah, that is actually a really good point. And I think some people are more forgiving of teens who make mistakes because you're a teen and you're supposed to be doing that. And, like, even though some mistakes could have repercussions for your entire life, it's different when you're supposed to be a functional adult and you're making mistakes. And what I also love about Malice House and sort of what we're talking about is that, like, the idea that a coming of age story doesn't just have to happen at 12 or 16 or 18. You're constantly having coming of age stories. Haven goes to her father's house after he's passed away, and losing a parent is a whole other coming of age story, no matter what age you lose a parent at, because you are questioning your identity without this person who's always been in your life. And like she's questioning also not just like his stories and this new manuscript that she finds, but also like the type of people he hung out with. He has this, what is it, literary salon they call themselves.
Yeah, they're a little bit pretentious, and she tries to call them a book club, and they quickly correct her and say, oh no, it's a literary salon. And they call themselves the ink drinkers, which is what the French call bookworms. Like, that's the French translation for bookworms, is ink drinkers.
I mean, super cute, but also they really take themselves so seriously. But I really liked her finding, reading these stories, and the stories themselves are super fun to sort of gather. Each chapter has like a little excerpt from Bedtime Stories for Monsters, so you sort of get who these characters are and just a little bit of the story. And I have to say, I have a soft spot for Pinchy.
Yes, I'm actually dressing up my dog as Pinchy. He's got a little lobster costume for Halloween.
For people who are going to read the book, and I recommend you do, Pinchy is one of the characters in Bedtime Stories for Monsters, and I don't really want to give too much away from him, but I do like him.
Yeah,
he's sinister, but in a very endearing way. But talking about people who are less endearingly sinister, so you have the Witch of Went, the Harbinger, who is sort of like the two of them are almost like ribbons who are woven between the stories. Like, if there's any interconnectedness, it's because they appear together and separately. You have Uncle Arnold, who is like super creepy. But you also have, like we mentioned, like the ink drinkers who just take things so seriously, and like they love Haven's father, but they're also not like the most supportive to her, and you kind of have to wonder why. And then there's Kylie, the barista, who has sort of her own relationship to the stories and the ink drinkers, because she works in this cafe and she sort of has to deal with them. And Haven coming to town gives her another outlet for talking about that. So it's like, it's just this really good balance between, here's some snippets of some stories that leave you wanting more. Here's this young woman who's leaving something behind and coming into something completely new. And here's just this fun town of weirdos.
Yeah, I think that's something so essential in the horror genre, is that, you can have creepy Stephen King-esque monsters. That's fantastic. But the real scary parts are the human characters. And so as much as I loved crafting the monsters, and they are quite violent and terrifying, it's the people who are the ones that are like really disturbing and in the book. And even the monstrous characters, I think there's 8 of them, 8 different stories, and they all have come from Haven's father's mind. And he was suffering from dementia when he created them. And in order to create them, I had to kind of get in the mind of like an older, very arrogant white dude, who's suffering from dementia. It's very different from myself.
So how did you do that?
Well, yeah, I thought about like what sort of fears would a man like him be going through at his age. And he would obviously be worrying about irrelevance, that his works are no longer important culturally. He's a very proud man, so he would worry that like women no longer find him attractive. He'd be worried about potential caregivers abusing him, relationships with fractured relationships with family, physical frailty, all of these fears. And so I kind of took each of those fears and turned them into a different monster. And so then it's, as Haven is reading bedtime stories for monsters and then also interacting with the actual monsters, she's learning a lot about her father. So the monsters do sort of still have this human element to them because they all come from a human.
So this is actually the first in a series.
Yes.
You've done something really awesome here, where you have made me really excited for the next book. There's been a few books this year that have kind of gotten me back into the series excitement. For a while, you start a book and you're just like, oh, is this a series? Like, am I gonna be able to commit to this when the next one comes out? But this is definitely one of the ones that I'm like, cannot wait. When is this going to be back? Did it always start out as a series for you, or did you sort of see an end point and you're just like, this story is just not done yet and I need some more time to tell it?
I tend to leave all my stories a little bit open-ended because that's how life is. But I did plan it as just a single title, and then Disney, the publisher, asked if I would be interested in turning it into a series, and I had so many ideas for where it could go. The first book deals heavily with the book world. It's got editors, it's got librarians, authors, booksellers, which I just kind of love that internal peek at the book world. But the second book deals with the film world. And so it tackles old Hollywood, film noir, that kind of Hitchcockian, creepy, early horror movie world. And so I'm just putting the final touches on it now. And I really love it too, because it deals with the same questions of artistic creation and what are writers and filmmakers and artists putting out in the world, and are we responsible for what we put out in the world? But from a really, really fun old Hollywood standpoint.
So what are some things that you enjoy reading and watching?
Oh my gosh, let's see. Watching right now, I'm obsessed with House of the Dragon. I've always loved,
as we all are.
I've always loved like Gothic fiction. That's one of my favorite genres. And I feel like the story has like some cool Gothic elements to it. Like really high drama interpersonal relationships and twists and turns. And the world is so much more insular than Game of Thrones was, in a way that I really kind of like. So yeah, and of course I love morally gray characters, of which that show has a lot.
For sure. Yes, lots of them. It's really interesting to see like who people have sort of latched onto in that fandom. And I agree too. There's sort of something with the storytelling being a little bit more focused. Not that I did not love, there were so many characters in Game of Thrones that I loved and also hated, but and also hate loved or love hated, but it is a little bit more focused of a narrative, because of it's really just focusing on this one house and how other houses relate to that specific house.
Yeah. And then books, like I went through a period during the pandemic where I just couldn't read very much. I didn't have the attention span, but now I'm coming out of that, and so I'm just diving into so many books. And I just read The Last to Vanish by Megan Miranda, which is
another Megan.
Another Megan. Yes, she's one of my closest critique partners and friends too. But her books are just fantastic, and they're thrillers, and they've really done well. And then Adrienne Young, who's another YA author, just came out with her first book for adults as well, called Spells for Forgetting, which is also set, like Malice House is set in the Pacific Northwest near the San Juan Islands. And hers has the same basis for her setting and a touch of magical, that kind of magical realism as well. That one I've enjoyed. Shay Earnshaw's History of Wild Places also has a touch of the my favorite books to read are the ones that are very heavily based in our world, but do have a touch of magic.
Yeah, same here. I'm definitely a fan of I guess contemporary fantasy, dark fantasy. Yes, and I think like for me, because I had been reading a lot of horror and dark fantasy during the pandemic, I think there's sort of something soothing about your world's distorted, especially when your world is really actually distorted.
Yes, yeah. During the pandemic, I was, of course, like everyone, very isolated in my house. But my house is isolated anyway. I live in this 130-year-old farmhouse that is just deep in the middle of nowhere in North Carolina. And I love it. And as a writer, I'm an introvert. It's a wonderful place to write from. But during the pandemic, I mean, it did get very claustrophobic, being here with two babies, two young children, and of course, my husband and all of our animals, and just, feeling like my house was both my haven and my prison. And I was writing Malice House at that time. And so I think that, that translated, whether intentionally or unintentionally, into the tone of the book.
I like it. It worked very well. Yeah, I actually am very much looking forward to the next book. It should be very interesting. It's cool that you'd mentioned that your publisher was interested in it being a series. Any talk about like an adaptation?
Oh, we haven't gotten into that just because since it just came out, we haven't gotten, too many details yet. I would love to see, I'm a huge Mike Flanagan fan.
Yes, I love Mike Flanagan. Oh my God, that would be so perfect.
Yeah, The Haunting of Hill House. I loved Midnight Mass. I haven't watched his new one, The Midnight Club, yet, but I just think that the way he deals with horror and the way that he balances the real world dangers and the supernatural dangers are just perfect. He just walks that line so beautifully. Totally perfect. And they're all, it's just really good stuff. Oh, that would be so great. I know. I was going through the cast of Midnight Mass and I was like, ooh, they could play this person. They could play this person.
Yeah, it's so funny because that one character, and he's I forget what the actor's name is, but when Haven meets Rafe, is it?
Yeah, right.
I 100% saw him playing that character in my mind.
Oh, nice. Yeah. And then my publisher and I have talked a little bit about maybe writing the full version of some of the stories from Bedtime Stories for Monsters. In Malice House, each chapter heading is a little snippet, and so you get a sense of what the stories are, but you don't actually get the full stories. And so I've thought about writing maybe Pinchy's story or some of the other ones.
Yay!
Just as a nice little bonus for readers.
Well, thank you so much. Malice House is available now, right?
It just came out about a week and a half ago. And it's right in time for Halloween.
Very cool. So we are very excited for the next one. And thank you so much, Meghan Shepherd, for visiting us from isolation where you are.
Yeah, it was such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much, Jessikah.
You're welcome. And we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.